Hi, I'm Gary White, and this is Quarantine Cocktails. And today, I had the pleasure of talking with Dixon Dedman, who is the master blender for Kentucky Owl Bourbon. And Dixon is actually at the Owl's Nest Tavern, right, at the Beaumont Inn.
That's correct. That's correct. I kind of set up shop here. It was easier. So.
Yes, because in addition to working with Kentucky Owl Bourbon, you actually own and operate the Beaumont Inn as well, correct?
That's correct. I mean, these are kind of two different parts of my family. The inn, we're in our 101st year. I'm the fifth generation of my family to kind of operate this business. So this little bar we added about, well, it's about 11 years ago now. So this is kind of one of the local watering holes that I manage, in addition to a lot of other hats that I wear.
Now, is the Owl's Nest a relation to Kentucky Owl, or is that just a coincidence?
Yeah, actually, when legislation passed in 2003, we actually added the Old Owl Tavern downstairs, which was kind of our first foray into more of a casual bar scene. And with the history of the owl and Kentucky Owl being in my family, we played on that a little bit. Which really drove me, it was another part of kind of learning that history and hearing those stories that kind of, made me all the more excited to resurrect the Kentucky Owl brand, which is, my family has a little history, different part of my family, but that, same type of kind of family history and story there. So
absolutely, and we're going to talk a little bit about that history, because Kentucky Owl Bourbon. Now, how long has Kentucky Owl been in operation now?
So we started the project in like 2010, 2011. We started releasing bourbon again in 2014, and so I've now released 9 different bourbon blends. I've released this Kentucky Owl Confiscated a few times, and then working on my 4th rye whiskey that will be released this summer as well. So we've grown from, in 2014 released 1,100 bottles. The 9th release of Kentucky Owl Bourbon was about 12,000 bottles. So it's certainly grown over the last few years anyway.
Absolutely. And today we're going to make a cocktail that actually is going to incorporate Kentucky Owl Bourbon, and it's the Confiscated Bourbon, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Confiscated was fun. It was, when we, my great-great-grandfather owned a distillery from 1876 until about 1917 on the Kentucky River. It was the C.M. Dedman distillery, and they made Kentucky Owl. And so, the idea was, not only to bring back this brand, but to bring it back with a kind of a new and what we thought was a very innovative strategy. And those are the limited releases. And then what I wanted to create was another product in the Kentucky Owl hierarchy that was slightly more approachable, both from the flavor perspective, but also to a certain extent the pricing perspective, although it's still significantly expensive. But the idea behind Confiscated was that when they enacted Prohibition, the federal government came and seized all of my great-great-grandfather's inventory. It was taken, it was put on barges, it was taken north and supposedly put in government-controlled rickhouses. A few years later, my family received word that we're really sorry these rickhouses burned, and basically they spent 15 years in litigation with the federal government to get any type of funding for that, and never received a dime. So when I was thinking about this new iteration of Kentucky Owl, I think about batch 1 through batch 9 of being kind of the rebirth and a new concept, and then we created this Confiscated, which was kind of a tribute to those barrels that were seized, that were confiscated. And the old stories where that was taken and sold on the black market and speakeasies throughout the Northeast, and then they burned some empty warehouses and said, whoops, and that was the end of it.
Yeah, and they say that it's the aging of bourbon is really important. But what do you think that confiscated bourbon would taste like today if you were ever able to find one of those from back in that time? That's 100 years ago, right?
I've been fortunate enough to try, a significant amount of bourbon that was produced in those pre-Prohibition era facilities, and some of them are pretty good, and some of them are not so good, but it's very similar. I think if you think of the difference between bourbon that was produced in the 60s and 70s versus the bourbon that you're used to tasting today. I mean, even the same label, just because of the process, it's completely different. And I don't think today's bourbon consumer would be very happy with the style of whiskey being made pre-Prohibition, but it's kind of cool to taste it anyway.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, the Kentucky Owl is going to have a distillery and location actually in Bardstown, hopefully in the near future, right?
Hopefully, absolutely. It's a very ambitious project, but one that I think the Bardstown community, I think the bourbon community, I think the distilling community will be very proud of, because it's unique. The concept's unique, but that you're talking about 400 and something acres of land now that will eventually be 200 and something acres of lakes, with a premium distillery situated on a peninsula right between these massive lakes. It's going to be pretty cool.
That'd be really neat. And what's the time frame when people can hopefully be able to see that, maybe?
I think things continue to shift. I think that the hope is some sort of visitor experience, bottling experience in 2021. A year and a half from now is what they're targeting. I think the distillery, because of the logistics of building a distillery on a quarry, there's just a lot of moving parts to that. But they're really actively trying to get some sort of experience open so people can get there and touch and feel and spend some time, tell a story and things like that. So.
Absolutely. So hopefully by the time we're all out of quarantine, hopefully we'll be out of quarantine by the time this opens. Exactly. But we're not right now, and that's why we're making quarantine cocktails. And today, what's the name of the cocktail that we're going to be making?
Well, I always call this, it's kind of it's a riff on a Boulevardier, which is technically a riff on a Negroni. So I always kind of refer to this as my confiscated Boulevardier. So it's a lot of the same elements, just the ratio changed up just a little bit.
Okay, so it's a confiscated. Tell me that again. Boulevardier.
Boulevardier, that's right.
Boulevardier. A confiscated Boulevardier that we're going to be making today in our quarantine cocktails. And tell us, if you will, what are the elements of this cocktail?
So essentially, if you look at the traditional Boulevardier, it's equal parts whiskey, sweet vermouth, and Campari. It's just 1 to 1 to 1. And while I love that cocktail, a lot of times for me, the Campari can be a little overpowering. And I like to really play on the citrus notes that are in the confiscated and kind of build that side of the drink a little heavier, if that makes sense.
Okay. Well, let's start off with the confiscated there. Now, you are the master blender for Kentucky Owl Bourbon. So tell us a little bit about Confiscated, what people can expect from it.
So, yeah, Confiscated is a 96.4 proof Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. It's a blend of this batch is 6, 7, 9, and 12-year-old bourbons, 4 different distillates that I blended to a particular ratio to find this flavor profile. And while what I like about this is that even at because the batch 9 that I just did is 126 proof. So if this is a tamer version of a full flavored bourbon. A lot of times when you get to a lower proof point, you end up losing a lot of the complexity. And what I wanted to build into this was still quite a bit of complexity where it reacts both in the initial sweet part of the front of the palate where you register that, and still has good spice on the back end. So Confiscated for me is a real nice balance of kind of sweet citrus on the front and then kind of cayenne finish on the back. And so it's been very well received in the bartending community because you can kind of play up these different elements of the profile.
Okay, great. And as we said, there are a few elements that are going to be part of this particular cocktail. So we have our Confiscated bourbon, which is the Kentucky Owl Confiscated. But then we have Campari, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. Would you call it a liqueur?
Yes, I mean, I think it's on here as a liqueur. It's oftentimes people do different, use it in a lot of cocktails. It can, people use it as an aperitif or digestif. It's oftentimes, you'll see people drinking it with club soda and squeeze a lime or something like that. Very refreshing. A little bit of a bitter note when it, and so I think I like it in cocktails because it will balance out something that gets overly sweet. I like the added element of Campari in this drink. It takes it from a super sweet Manhattan and gives it a bit of a kind of a bitter note, but it's also a bit refreshing.
Now, speaking of a Manhattan, there's an element that is traditionally in a Manhattan, and that's our dry or our sweet vermouth, right? Because we do have dry and we have sweet. So you have the white or the red, basically, right? Vermouth there. So tell us a little bit about that sweet vermouth for us.
I mean, vermouth is basically a wine. Is I think the way you would describe it. I think most everybody is familiar with vermouth in the dry vermouth in the martini, the sweet vermouth in the Manhattan. It's sweet vermouth. The flavor profiles are all over the map. I mean, you can get some that are very aromatic and some that are very herbal, and then you go the other direction with some that get very almost like syrupy sweet. Vermouth is a great thing to kind of play with and try different ones because their profiles are all over the place.
Okay. And the other two elements of this, we're going to have an orange that we're going to put a little bit of orange in there at the end, right? But we also have bitters. So tell us, what's the addition of the bitters?
It's just, I like using these orange bitters because I think it just gives it an additional kind of citrus pop. It takes it, a step further. It's just, I love playing with different bitters and seeing how they work and how they, what elements they add.
Cool. So they're going to be our 5 ingredients. We're going to have our Confiscated Kentucky Owl Confiscated bourbon. We have our Campari. We have the vermouth. We have some orange. And we have our orange bitters. So let's get started and get this cocktail going. Now, I know you're planning to put it over one of the large little blocks of ice, right?
That's the plan. But I can change it. I can switch it up if we need to.
No, that's a great plan. If you have that, can you show that to us, your block of ice there? Because what does that add as opposed to having individual ice cubes?
Well, the bigger cube chills the glass without a lot of the, this smaller cube is going to melt faster and it's just going to change the drink a little bit, and I think the one thing about being in quarantine is that, you're not, you got nowhere to go. So, people, maybe you drink it faster than you normally would. Don't have to worry about that little ice. But those, whether it's Amazon or wherever, you can buy these little neoprene, rubber trays and whether it's ice ball or a big cube or whatever. It's just really meant to, keep the drink cold, but not to melt too fast so you don't get that type of dilution.
Right. And I know the Blind Pig Bourbon Marketplace there in Bardstown has some of those too, that you buy it, and some of the different liquor stores as well. Speaking of that, where can you actually get Confiscated?
Confiscated, you still see it. I don't think we've pushed any out in Kentucky in a while. I'm actually working on another round of this blend right now. With all of this, quarantine stuff, we've begun to push some stuff into some e-com channels. So, I mean, I think you're going to see it available through the Spirits Network, Drizzly, Caskers, things like that, because, it's kind of where this, I know there's a box that arrives at my house just about every other day, because we just sit there and think, oh, I need this. And, you're just ordering it.
Exactly. So let's get started then with our Confiscated Boulevardier. Right?
Boulevardier, you got it.
Boulevardier, Confiscated Boulevardier. So let's get started. What do we need to do first?
Well, I take one of these, mixers, whatever type of mixer you got, it doesn't matter, ice. And then we're going to add 1.5 ounces of the Kentucky Owl Confiscated. And then, if you're feeling froggy, you just top that off a little bit. But it's 1.5 ounces of the Kentucky Owl Confiscated to start. Mm-hmm. And then 3/4 ounce of our Campari. So just a 3/4 ounce pour there. And then we're gonna do the same amount, 3/4 ounces of the sweet vermouth. And then, it's really up to you. This is one, this is a cocktail that I just like to stir in that ice. You can do whatever you want. I mean, you can shake it as much as you want, but I think just stirring it to get cold, because we're going over this cube of ice, it doesn't have to be beaten to death or bruised to death like you see some people do. And then what I like to do is to take the bitters, and instead of in the mix, I like to put the bitters straight on top of that, a couple dashes straight on top of that block of ice in there. So not in the shaker, but go ahead and put that straight in the glass, a couple drops there. Okay. And then I'm just going to strain this right over my big ice cube here.
Looks good. Pretty.
And then a nice, generous little piece of our orange peel, and we're gonna give this a couple twists to kind of express that zest in there. See, bartenders now, they really like to do the rim of the glass with the orange, and then just drop that thing right in there. It's a pretty little cocktail.
Absolutely, that's very nice. So, now the best part is getting to taste it, right?
Right.
Very nice.
Yeah, I'm very pleased with how mine turned out. I hope you enjoy yours as well.
I am as well. That's great. That's really good. That's very good. And it's a pretty color too.
Yeah, it makes a beautiful drink. I mean, you can do this. It's beautiful in like a champagne bowl, or any type of you can get this really cold in a shaker and just serve this up, as opposed to on a rock or on the rocks too. And it makes a beautiful drink.
Absolutely. And I like how you're saying. Now we used an old-fashioned glass, right?
Right.
Is what you recommend for
Absolutely.
it.
Well, I think it's much like any cocktail. I mean, it depends on how you enjoy it. We'll do cocktails here at the end, and we keep cocktail glasses, martini glasses in a mug froster, and so they come out and they're freezing cold, and you pour it straight in there, and some people if you're in quarantine in your sweatpants and your sweatshirt and you need to feel fancy, you go get some fancy stemware and have your drink that way.
Exactly. Or just enjoy it.
However you want to enjoy it.
Exactly. So since you're the master blender and you've been in quarantine, are you coming up with some new, unique, different kind of drinks? Is that a little playtime for you?
But it's been a lot of fun. Opportunities like this and some of the, and whether you get on there and you talk about the whiskey and then I watch some famous mixologist cook up all these drinks. I did one the other day. They did a similar cocktail, but the guy was lighting cinnamon sticks on fire and then trapping the smoke in the rocks glass, and so I'm learning a thing or two as well, as just coming on different forums and kind of talking about the whiskey being used in cocktails. So.
Absolutely. Well, this is great, and it is the Confiscated Boulevardier.
That's
right?
it.
Okay. And there's ingredients. You'll be able to see it on our website as well to take part. And so does Kentucky Owl Bourbon have something new or different coming up in the near future that people should be looking out for?
I've got a release, a very exciting release called Kentucky Owl Dry State that's coming in just a little bit, and that's kind of to commemorate the 100 years of the dry state, the prohibition. So it's a 1919 or 1920, 2020 thing, and we're waiting on final production of that. And then my fourth release of rye whiskey, that'll be releasing, as soon as we can get it out there, and so those are the two that are coming sooner rather than later. And then I'm back at work on batch number 10, which we'll release in the fall.
Fantastic. So keep your eye out, and that's with Kentucky Owl Bourbon. And we want to mention too, if you're looking for, once we're out of quarantine and you're looking for some place to visit, you're in there's a great place to go visit and maybe get a cocktail there. Can you get this cocktail at the Owl's Nest Tavern?
Cocktail here, and a lot of other ones with both the Kentucky Owl Bourbon products and Kentucky Owl Rye products, or flights of some of the releases we have, and a pretty good fried chicken dinner too, if you're interested. So come on over.
Absolutely. Great. So again, I've been talking with Dixon Dedman, who is with Kentucky Owl Bourbon. And keep your eye out. Try the confiscated drink that we made up here. This has been Quarantine Cocktails. Thank you very much.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.